Your neighbor paid $20,000 to put solar panels on his roof, and he was told he would be energy independent. He was told he would never write a check to the power company again. And then the first winter bill came, and he still owed them money. He sold them his summer sunshine at their cheap price all season long, and then they sold it right back to him in December at their expensive price. And somehow at the end of the year, the man with $20,000 of panels shining on his roof was still writing a check to the utility every single month. Now let me tell you about my workshop. There is one solar panel leaning against the south wall of my barn, and there is one battery sitting on a shelf inside, about the size of a small cooler. That panel and that battery run the lights and a couple of tools in my shop, and they have done it quietly for years, and I have never paid a power bill in my life. And it is not because I am Amish, and we just do without it, is because we figured out something about solar a long time ago that the man who sold your neighbor those rooftop panels will never tell him. And I want you to sit with this, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Your neighbor did not buy independence. He bought a longer leash. My name is Eli Lapp. I am Amish, and I farm in Holmes County, Ohio. And all over my county, and over in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, you will find Amish families running solar on the barn, on the buggy, on the water pump, on the chicken house, and on the milk cooler. And we are not connected to the power company. We never have been. And our setups cost a small fraction of what your neighbor paid, because we never bought the part that costs the most and does the least. And today I am going to show you the exact setup, 4 parts, a few $100s an afternoon of work, no contractor, no permit, no contract, and you never touch the wiring already in your house. And I am going to tell you what each part does and what each part costs, and I am going to show you the one load in your home that is the perfect place to begin. And I am going to tell you the part near the end that should make you a little angry, which is that this simple, cheap, durable, honest way of using the sun was quietly pushed aside. And not because it stopped working, but because there was no way for anybody in an office to make a steady living off of you with it. So stay with me. This one is worth your time, especially heading into summer. Now, my wife Naomi and I gathered all of this the whole way. We run a plain home off the grid, the solar, the cold storage, the water, the saving of money into a book, and it is over at elilap.com, and I will not bring it up again in this video. It is just there if you want it, and I would rather you build the thing than buy the book. So let me get right to it, and let me be honest with you the whole way through, the way I always am, including telling you plainly where this little system stops and what it will never do. Because a man who only tells you the bright side is a man selling you something. Let me start with what your neighbor actually bought, because once you understand it, the rest of this makes plain sense. When most folks put solar on their house today, they buy what is called a grid tie system, and here is how it works. The panels on the roof make electricity, and that electricity runs down into a big box called an inverter, which changes it into the kind of power your house uses. And then here is the important part. It connects straight to the power company's wires. The electricity your panels make flows out onto the grid, and the power company keeps track of it and gives you a credit. And that sounds fine. That sounds neighborly. But here is the trouble in the summer when the sun rides high, and your panels make more than you use the extra flows out to the power company, and they credit you for it, but often at their cheap wholesale price, the price they pay. And then in the winter, when the sun hangs low and short, and your panels make less than your house needs, you pull power back off the grid and they charge you for it at their expensive retail price, the price you pay. So you sold low all summer and you buy back high all winter, and the whole difference drops quietly into their pocket, and they call it net metering. and your neighbor called it being told he was independent and then opening a bill anyway. And now think hard about what that $20,000 actually bought him. The panels themselves are maybe a third of it, maybe less, and all the rest is the big grid tie inverter and the interconnection equipment and the permits and the licensed installation crew and the financing with its interest stretched out over 25 years. And almost every dollar of that exists for one reason, only because the system has to talk to the power company's grid you paid for the privilege of. Becoming a tiny unpaid power plant for the utility, using your own roof and your own money and your own sunshine to make electricity that they then turn around and sell back to you. That is not independence, friend. That is a leash with a longer rope and a prettier collar, and we do it completely differently. And the difference is not some fancy new technology. It is one plain idea. We refuse the one thing that whole expensive arrangement is built around. We refuse the wire that ties us to the power company. Here is the way we do it and the way you can do it. And there are only 4 parts. And I will tell it slow, and I will tell you what each one does, so you actually understand it. And do not just buy it. The first part is a solar panel, and for a starter setup, a single 100-watt panel is plenty. That is a panel about 2 feet by 4 feet, the kind you have seen bolted on a camper or a fishing boat, and it costs somewhere around $75 to $100. And the panel's only job is to turn sunlight into electricity. That is the whole of it. No moving parts, nothing to wear out, nothing to break it, just sits in the light and works. The second part is a charge controller. And this is a small box that costs around $25 to $30, and it sits between the panel and the battery. And its job is to manage the flow, to take the power coming off the panel and feed it into the battery the right way, so the battery does not get overcharged and ruined. Think of it as the valve on a rain barrel that keeps the barrel from drinking too fast and bursting small and cheap and important, and you do not skip it. The third part is the battery, and this is where the sun gets stored. So you can use it after dark or on through a cloudy day. And for a starter setup, a 100 amp hour lithium battery, the kind they call lithium iron phosphate, which is the safe, long-lasting kind, not the kind that catches fire, runs. You somewhere between $150 and $250, and the battery is the heart of the whole thing. It is the part that makes the sun available at night. A 100 amp hour battery at 12 volts holds around 1,200 watt hours of power. And that is a useful pile of energy. Let me put a real number on it, because numbers are how you tell the truth from the sales talk. A chest freezer in a year of normal use draws maybe 200 to 300 watt hours a day spread across its cycles, and that 1,200 watt hour battery can carry that freezer through the night and through a gray morning with room left over, and a single 100-watt panel in good sun will pour 250 to 400 watt hours back into that battery on an average day. So the math closes, the panel makes more than the freezer eats, and the battery holds. The difference for the dark hours, and that is the whole quiet engine of it. The panel fills it slow through the day, and you draw it down whenever you need it, and it asks nothing of anybody, and it sends you no bill. The fourth part is an inverter, but a small one. Not the $8,000 monster bolted to your neighbor's wall. A small inverter, maybe 400 watts, costs around $40, and its job is simply to change the battery's power into the ordinary kind your appliance plugs into. And here is a small thing worth knowing. If the thing you want to run already runs on battery-type power, like LED lights, or a buggy lamp, or some little pumps, then you may not even need the inverter at all. But for a normal household appliance with a normal plug, the small inverter does the job for $40. And that is the whole system. A panel, a charge controller, a battery, and a small inverter. And you add it up, and you are sitting in the few $100 range and not the $20,000 range, and every single part is simple enough that you can understand it and replace it and fix it yourself with hand tools on a kitchen table. Now here is how you put it together, and I want you to notice how little there is to it. You lean the panel against the sunniest wall of your house, or you set it on a simple frame out in the yard, and you want the south-facing side, if you have one, because that catches the most sun through the whole arc of the day, and then you run the wire from the panel in through a window or a vent, and you connect the panel to the charge controller, and you connect the charge controller to the battery, and you connect the battery to the small inverter, and you plug your appliance into the inverter, and that is the entire installation. An afternoon, a screwdriver, and a wrench. And here is the part most folks get wrong. You put a fuse right there between the battery and the rest of the system before you ever run it. And I will say more about that fuse in a moment. But it goes on first, not last. And there is no permit to pull because you have not touched a single wire already in your house. And you have not connected one thing to the power company. This little circuit stands completely on its own, the very same way the lamp on an Amish buggy stands on its own panel, its own battery, its own job, answering to nobody. Now let me give you the honest safety word plainly, because this matters, and I take it seriously, and you should too. A battery holds a great deal of energy in a small, quiet box, and electricity deserves your respect. First, you want that fuse between the battery and the rest of the system, so that if something ever shorts out, it blows the little fuse instead of starting a fire. And a fuse costs a couple of dollars, and it is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy. Second, you keep the battery somewhere dry and ventilated and not sealed up in a hot, airless box, because heat is hard on a battery and a battery wants to breathe. Third, you use the right size wire for the load. A wire too thin for the current it carries gets hot, and a hot wire is how trouble starts. And the instructions that come with your parts will tell you the gauge you need, and you follow them. And if you are unsure, you ask somebody who knows before you switch it on, and not after. None of this is hard, but you do it right, and you respect the battery the way I would respect a sharp axe. An axe is a fine and useful servant right up until you are careless with it. And the same is true here. Treat it with care, and it will serve your family well for years. And one more honest thing before I go, on this little setup is not going to run your whole house, and I will not pretend otherwise. It is not going to run central air conditioning that pulls far more power than a starter system makes in a day. And it is not going to run an electric range or an electric water heater. Those are heavy, heavy loads. What it will do, and do beautifully, is run one specific job, one specific load, completely free and completely independent of the grid. And that, it turns out, is exactly how we have always done it. Here is the thing the rest of the country forgot, and it is the very heart of this whole video. The Amish do not try to power the whole house off one big system. We power one task at a time, one panel and one battery for the buggy lights, and a separate panel and battery for the water pump, and another for the lights out in the shop, and another for the fence charger that keeps the cattle in, and another for the wringer washing machine, and each job gets its own little independent setup. And we did not solar power the house. We solar powered the chores, one at a time over the years as we could afford each one. And that is exactly the model I want you to take from me. You do not. You have to do your whole house this weekend. You do one thing. You pick the single best load to start with, and you set it free from the power company. And then once you have done one, you understand it in your hands and your bones. And then you do the next one, and it costs you nothing in nerves, because you already know how. So, which load do you start with? I will tell you the best one, and the answer might surprise you. It is your chest freezer. And here is why a chest freezer is the perfect place to begin. A freezer does not run all the time, it cycles. It runs for a while and gets everything down good and cold, and then it shuts off and rests for a good long while before it ever needs to run again. And a full, well-insulated chest freezer with the lid kept shut will hold its cold for a day or even more with no power at all, and that makes it forgiving. It does not need a constant, perfect, unbroken flow of electricity the way some things do. It needs power some of the time, and it can coast right through the gaps on the cold it already stored. And that is exactly the kind of load a small solar setup handles without breaking a sweat. The freezer sips and rests, and sips and rests, and your panel fills the battery back up in between. And let me tell you why the freezer beats the things you might reach for first, because folks always want to start with the refrigerator, and a refrigerator is a harder first load. It has a door you open 20 times a day, and warm air falls in every time, and it has to recover, and a refrigerator wants steadier power than a freezer does. And then folks think of the lights. But lights are no real burden to anybody, and you will not feel the freedom of it. And then folks think big and reach for the air conditioner, and that one will break your little system. The first hot afternoon. No, the freezer is the wise place to start because it is the largest steady saving that a small system can actually carry. And it is the one load where running on the sun does something a grid never could. It keeps your food. Through the storm, a freezer is a full year of summer work put. Up against winter, it is the garden you canned, and the hog you raised, and the venison from the fall. All sitting in one box, and the day the grid fails. That box is either your security or your heartbreak. And on solar, it is your security. So you put your chest freezer on its own little solar circuit, and three things happen at once. The first thing is, it runs for free off the sun from this day on, and that bill is simply gone. And a freezer left on the grid will cost you somewhere between $40 and $100 a year in electricity, year after year forever. And on the sun, it costs you nothing after the parts. The second thing, and this is the one that matters most, when the power goes out in the next big summer storm, or the next ice storm, and your neighbors up and down the road are hauling out freezers full of spoiled meat and crying over a whole hog's worth of pork, yours just keeps humming along like nothing happened at all, because it was never depending on the grid in the first place. It never knew the power went out. And the third thing is, you will have your first real piece of independence, sitting right there in your own home, and not the kind printed in a glossy sales brochure, but the real kind, the kind you built with your own two hands and that no company on earth can take back or bill you for. And once you have done the freezer, you are going to start looking at every other plug in your house a little differently: the second freezer in the garage, the pump on the well, the lights on the porch, the fan out in the shop, the little chest freezer at your hunting camp. Each one is a candidate, and each one can be set free one at a time. The very same way we have been doing it out here for decades. And let me give you a real example, because I do not want you thinking this is just one stubborn farmer talking. There is a real solar business in Amish country, a company over in Gordonville called Belmont Solar. And the man who speaks for them put it about as plain as it can be put, he said. The Amish. This system is really simple. It is just a couple of panels and a battery. And that is the whole engineering of it. A couple of panels and a battery. And now I want you to hold that simple sentence up. Next to the 40-page proposal, the salesman left on your neighbor's kitchen table, the financing agreement, the interconnection contract with the utility, the production guarantee, the inverter warranty that just happens to run out right around the time the panels start to fade, the monitoring app on his phone, the customer service line that never quite picks up, and the Amish skipped every last bit of that. We kept the panel and we kept the battery and we threw the contract in the stove. And I want to be fair and honest with you here, because honest is the only way this is worth doing. Practices differ between Amish communities, and that is the truth in my community here in Holmes. County, we allow solar like this off-grid, our own panels and our own batteries for our own tasks, and the stricter orders do without even that. And I will tell you plainly that even our way is not magic. The batteries do not last forever. A county, good lithium battery might give you a decade or more if you treat it kindly. And then one day you replace it, and cloudy stretches are real. So you size your system with a little room to spare. So a string of gray days does not leave you short. And if you live where the winter sky stays gray for a week at a time, then you do not run one panel, you run two, and you do not run one battery, you run two. And the cost is still a small thing next to $20,000. And you learn your own sky. Over a season or two, you learn how many cloudy days your part of the country strings together in February. And you build for the worst week, not the best one. And that is the honest way to size it. Build for the bad week, and the good weeks take care of themselves. And this takes a little learning and a little tending. It is true, but it is simple. Learning and simple tending, the kind any careful person of ordinary sense can pick up. And once it is set up, it mostly just works quietly, day after day, on the free light that falls out of the sky over your house every single morning, whether you are watching or not. And before I go on, let me pause for just a moment, because somebody watching is already wondering how they grow this past that first freezer. And the answer is the plainest thing in the world. You grow it the way a garden grows, one row at a time. The first step up is to add a second 100-watt panel and a second battery, or one bigger battery, and now you have doubled what you can carry, and you have a real cushion for the cloudy week. And 200 watts of panel and 200 amp hours of battery will carry your freezer and your well pump together off the same little circuit, or your freezer and a good string of lights all through the house. And the beauty of it is you do not tear anything out. You add on to what you already built and have already learned, and the controller you bought may already handle the second panel as it sits, and if it does not, a bigger controller is still only $30 or $40. And then there is the third layer, the one the honest folks always plan for, and the salesman never mentions, and that is what you do in the dead of winter on the third gray day in a row when the sun simply will not give you enough. And the answer the plain people have leaned on for generations is to keep a small backup that does not depend on the sky at all. And for most folks, that is a small gasoline or propane generator that you fire up for 1 hour to top the battery off when the sun has been stingy and you are not running the house. On the generator, you are just giving the battery a drink and an hour of a little generator a handful of times across a whole winter. Is a cheap and honest insurance, and it means a long, cloudy stretch never leaves your family cold or in the dark, and my bishop would say the sun is a faithful servant. But it is not a slave, and you do not ask any one servant to carry the whole load alone. You keep a second way tucked in your back pocket, and you sleep easy. And let me lay out the honest math over the years, because that is the number a careful person ought to weigh. Say you spend $500 to set your freezer free, and the battery in it gives you a good 10 years. And then you spend $200 more to put a fresh one in. So over 10 years, you have spent $700 all told, and that is $70 a year for that piece of independence. And now hold that next to the grid tie, way over those same 10 years. $20,000 up front, with interest still running on. Most of it and a connection fee and a winter bill landing the whole time on top of it. And there is no honest way to make the $20,000 leash come out cheaper than the $70 a year freedom. It simply cannot be done with a pencil. And the freedom does not only save you the money, it saves you the worry too, because when the next ice storm drops the lines for 4 days, the man with the $70 freezer setup never once thinks about it. Now, I want to take a moment because this next part is the part that matters most, and it is bigger than freezers and bigger than batteries. I want you to think hard about who profits from the way your neighbor was sold. His solar, the panel, maker profits, and the inverter maker profits, and the installer profits, and the financing company profits on the interest for 25 long years, and the power company itself profits, because even with all those shining panels on his roof, your neighbor is still tied to their wire, still paying the connection fee every month, still buying back his own summer sunshine. At their winter price, every single party in that whole arrangement makes money, except the one man who paid for all of it. And a plain panel and a battery running a freezer down in your basement makes nobody any money. But you, there is no contract, and there is no monthly payment. And there is nobody standing in the middle taking a cut off the top of the sunshine. And that, and not one thing about how well it works, is the real reason you have never once heard a salesman recommend it. There is no salesman, because there is nothing to sell. You buy 4 parts one time and you are done. And you cannot build a 25-year business around a man who only needs you the one time. And I want to say this carefully, because the title of a video like this can get loud. It was not banned. It was not made illegal. And there is no law against any of it. It was just left out of the conversation, pushed off to the side, while all the money and all the advertising went pouring into. The expensive way and the knowledge itself was never destroyed. It was just outshouted, drowned under 100 bright ads for the version somebody could profit from. And I do not even call that a conspiracy, because a conspiracy needs men in a room agreeing to keep a thing from you. And it is. Worse than that in a way, and stranger, nobody ever had to sit down at a table and arrange any of it. It is just that the expensive way had money behind it to shout, and the simple way had no money behind it at all, so it stayed quiet. And meanwhile, out here in the still places, we just kept doing the plain thing that always worked. My bishop said something to me once that I have never quite been able to shake. He said, "The English think we refuse the machine, and we do not refuse the machine. We refuse the wire that ties us to the man who owns the machine." He said, "A diesel engine is fine because we own it and we can buy fuel from 100 different sellers, and a solar panel and a battery are fine because the sun belongs to no man and the battery sits there on our own shelf. But a wire running back to a company in an office somewhere, a company that decides the price and writes the contract and sends the bill, that is the thing we will not have, and not because we fear it, but because we have seen what it costs. A man both in dollars and in something deeper to depend on a thing he cannot control and cannot fix. And that is the whole of it. That is the whole of it. The freezer is just where you start. So here is what I want you to do this week going into the summer. And the very first thing is, do not buy a single thing yet. Sit down tonight at the kitchen table with a pencil and audit your true essential watt hours. And that is a fancy sounding word for a plain, simple chore walk through your house. And ask yourself what handful of things you truly could not do without. If the lines went down tomorrow, not everything, just the few that matter. The freezer with a year of meat in it. The pump that brings your water. A few lights. The phone you charge, and you write them down. And you look at the little tag on the back of each one, and it will tell you its watts, and that short, honest list is the whole map of your independence. And most folks have never once written it down, and then and only then pick one load. And I would start with the chest freezer, but it is your house and your call. So maybe it is the spare refrigerator in the garage, or maybe it is the well pump, or maybe it is the lights out on the porch. But you pick one, and then you buy the 4 parts: a 100-watt panel, a charge controller, a 100-amp-hour lithium, iron phosphate battery, and a small inverter. And you add the fuse and the right gauge wire, and it is a few $100s, all told, and you can have the whole of it sitting in the trunk of your car by the weekend, and then you lean the panel against your sunniest wall and you run the wire in, and it goes panel to controller and controller to battery and battery to inverter and the appliance into the inverter and the fuse on the battery. First and afternoon, a screwdriver and a wrench. And when you plug that freezer in and you stand there and watch it run on nothing in this world but the sunshine hitting the wall of your own house, you are going to feel something you have not felt about your own home in a long, long time. You are going to feel like you own a piece of it again. Now tell me down in the comments below, which load would you set free? First the chest freezer, or the well pump, or the workshop lights, or the porch lights, or something I have not even thought of. Be specific and tell me what it is. Because the next video I am putting together walks through 3 of these builds step by step with the actual wire sizes and the actual battery sizes for each one. And what you tell me down there is going to decide which 3 I build first. And I read every single comment that comes in. I read every one. And next time I am also going to show you how my family keeps food cold all summer long down in the root cellar with no electricity at all. None the old way with the deep earth and the cool and a little running water, doing the very work that a refrigerator does. And it pairs with everything I showed you today. And it is older than any battery ever made. So until then, go on and lean a panel against your wall and set one thing free. And remember, that is how the careful old folks did it. That is how it is still done in any farmhouse that remembers.